Hey, everybody, welcome to the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Nash, and I'm excited to introduce you today to a guest that I am confident I will have a riveting conversation with. And I think you all will enjoy this conversation as well. And so introducing you here to Cheryl Fields Tyler, who is the founder and CEO at Blue Beyond Consulting. So, Cheryl, welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here, Ethan. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this time together. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, sure. Could you just tell our audience maybe a little bit about yourself, your work, what the heck you're doing
Sure.
out there in the world?
Sure. Yeah, I'm the founder and owner and CEO of Blue Beyond Consulting. We've been in business for 18 years, but I've been even well before that. I won't even betray how old I am by saying how long. I've been essentially working on the people side of business, Ethan. All of the things that are the soft things that are so-called the hard things in business. So culture, leadership, communication, alignment, all of those kinds of things. And at Blue Beyond, I really founded the company because I had been advising organizations on these types of things and doing research on these types of things for many years, and wondered, could I create a company that actually did what we said we should do and create an organization where both the people thrive, but also the business thrives. And 18 years in, I have to say it's been a pretty good experiment. We've been on the best place to work list for Fortune magazine a few times. We've been certified as a best place to work for many years. So we really do try to kind of drink our own champagne, so to speak, in the way that we run our own business in terms of making it a great place for people, but also a great place to achieve exceptional outcomes for our business. But what that really means is exceptional outcomes for our clients. So we work in an interdisciplinary way across communications, culture, leadership, management, talent. Essentially anything on the people side of business we do, and we really are honored to be on your podcast today.
Well, thank you for that, and again, glad to have you on. And where are you? Where's Blue Beyond located? Where are you located at?
Sure. Yes, I'm. Well, our headquarters is in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I grew up in the high tech industry and in Silicon Valley professionally. My team is about half Californian and half all over the U.S. So we have people actually in 25 different states, and we work, mostly in U.S. based multinational, 500 Fortune 500 type firms, but we also have a very thriving practice with universities and nonprofits. So we do quite a bit of work in those sectors as well.
Terrific. And you and your team at Blue Beyond, just from my understanding, released this terrific report that I got my hands on here, called "Winning on the People Side of Business." Could you just tell us a bit about your research? Like, where did what led you to doing this research? How did you try to understand the
Sure.
questions you were trying to understand? And yeah, just tell us a bit about what you have here.
Yeah, this is really the sort of follow up of some research that we did initially in 2021. So that was height of pandemic, right after January 6th, lots of stuff
Mm.
going on in our society at that time, Ethan, of course. And we were hearing from our clients at that point that they were trying to really understand, what is this kind of what are the contours of the new set of expectations that people are bringing? We had quiet quitting, we had, all of the things, right, happening in 21. And so we
Mhm.
did this original piece of research at that point. It was really interesting, very compelling. The kind of headline that I would sort of highlight from that research is that what we found is that people really were looking to their employers and business more broadly to be good for the world, but good for the world in three very distinct dimensions. Good for them, for their world. So pay me fairly, give me flexibility, all of those kinds of factors, the kind of immediate personal factors. Be good for us. So don't just like talk about building an effective culture and an effective workplace and psychological safety and all those kinds of things. do it, right? Be good for us as colleagues, for us as teams, for us as an organization, but also be good for the world. Show up with a perspective about societal issues that are aligned with my values, advocate for DEI, be a part of sort of the solution, so to speak, to some of the societal challenges that we were dealing with at that time. So that was 21. And, it was very compelling, very interesting. We got a lot of great feedback from it. This year we thought, gosh, we are in a really different zeitgeist now, right? There's a very different set of concerns. All you have to do is read the news about like, okay, is DEI really a commitment or not? Are people,
Mhm.
we're definitely not in the quiet quitting anymore. There's definitely this whole thing of like, is the job market, kind of a lot more tight now in terms of people looking for jobs and, in unemployment going up. So we really wanted to understand how were some of the things we're seeing in 21 the same and different, and really what are some of the emerging issues happening now. So for instance, around something like hybrid work, there's been a lot of talk about, the latest is Amazon saying we want our people back full time. And in fact, there's no negotiation on this. And other companies that said we're all remote back in 21, 22 are now backtracking on that. What do we think is really going to be happening with something like hybrid work? AI, what are people thinking about AI? As well as all the things we asked about last time. What's most important for your business to thrive now and in the future? What are the most important factors to building a great culture? And what are
Mm.
the things that matter most to you personally in terms of your work experience? So we did that research this year. We actually broadened the categories of demographics we were looking for. And we did our survey in April, May timeframe, and then also did about 30 qualitative interviews with business leaders across the US. And this is a US based focus. So,
Mhm.
so that's really the output that we just released today is our winning on the people side of business research, and with some recommendations as well as what the kind of key takeaways are and how those things might be helpful for people going forward. One of the things I know that we were talking about before is some of the interesting things here is the generations at work. How are generations the same? How are they different? How are they different than where they were in 21, and how that is happening? So we've got some really interesting information specifically around the generations at work.
Amazing. Yeah, and let's double click on the generations in the workplace. We'll circle back to some of the kind of overall high level findings as well as some of your recommendations because I find these really interesting and actionable. But generations in the workplace. Now, your punchline here in the report is generations in the workplace are more alike than different. And I think
Yes.
for many people, including myself, that feels a bit counterintuitive. And so let's start there, right? Where are generations more alike than they are different? What did you find here?
Yes. Yeah, very great question. Honestly, this was counterintuitive to us too. We were very surprised when we saw this data and have looked at it in lots of different dimensions. And basically, what we're finding is that this is going to be a little bit oversimplified, Ethan. So let me say the broad thing, and then I can say a couple of the specifics. When we looked at the 21 data, it was millennials and Gen Z that were really interested in things like the for me factors, right? The
Mm.
well-being, mental health, belonging, inclusion, the things that had to do with, kind of career development, learning, skill development, all of those kinds of things. This is really what, it was really more, those things were all rated highly, but more highly by people age 45 and younger. There was just a lot of interest in all of those kinds of things. One of the things we see in this data is that those commitments and those interests for mental health and well-being, physical health and well-being, pay fairness, all of those kinds of things, those are all still very much things that people under 45 care about. But guess what? Over 45 care about just as much now than our younger colleagues. And I find that so interesting because
Mm.
there's just, even still, when I talk with senior leaders about this, there's kind of a sense that those issues are really the purview of younger people, that they're the one bringing these things to the workplace, and maybe they brought them, but the truth is like now we see on something like employee health and well-being, the under 45 cohort is cares about it just as much as the over 45 cohort. And actually, we've seen huge growth in the percentage of baby boomers in particular that now put health and well-being as right at the top of their list of priorities, personally and
Hmm.
for their companies.
Yeah, that is super interesting. It's this weird thing where it feels both counterintuitive based on, what we hear in the media, but if we really unpack the layers there, it seems totally intuitive, right? Of course, everybody would value, their well-being. And I'm curious, and you alluded to this, do you think that because the demographic that are under 45 started bringing this emphasis to the workplace, that caused the demographic over 45 to start being more interested in this? Or do you think it was always the case, and just maybe in the past the older generation was not vocalizing this as much as the under 45 generation? Does that make
I
sense?
think it's, yeah, totally. And I think it's a really interesting question, Ethan. I'll tell you what my hypothesis is, but it's more than a hypothesis because we heard it a lot in the key informant interviews. Um, you know, the reality is that it's in the workplace. So, boomers and Gen X are seeing the benefits of this focus on health and well being. That's really important. Secondly, we also know we are in, some have even coined our current zeitgeist as the anxiety age. We
Hmm.
literally have an epidemic of anxiety, mental health issues, other kinds of anxiety related illnesses that are a part of the modern life. And, unfortunately, those things, well, those don't discriminate by age. We have that happening across every age group. So people are experiencing that personally. But we also heard very interestingly, it's easy to think about these health and well-being things as primarily, kind of like physical and mental health. That's part of it. But part of it is things like financial health. For instance, the cost of childcare, the cost of housing. And the reality is Gen X and boomers have kids or nieces or nephews or extended family members or colleagues that are in these younger generations, and they're seeing that struggle. And so in some cases, experiencing it right with our younger generation colleagues because we're trying to help them get a house. We're trying to help them figure out their childcare situations, right? If they're our children or our parents, et cetera. So the reality is that one of the things that we really see is that these alignment of these concerns are really because there's sort of a sense that we're all in this together, right? There's not a sense that these are only the considerations of millennials and Gen Z. No, these are the considerations of all of us because we're all in this age of anxiety. We're all going through some of these challenges around affordability, the high cost of education. There's a long, long list. And I think the reality coming out of the pandemic is that a lot of people have realized that health and well-being is really right at the top of the list, and it's not just about the health insurance and mental health coverage. I mean, those are again core things, but it's also about these other aspects of kind of just having a life that is good for me, to use the term that we used in our earlier report.
Hmm. That makes sense. I'm curious, Cheryl. So, our clients, we have several clients that have called us even in the last, 12 months, 24 months. And the request is essentially we need help bridging the generational divide in the workplace. Right.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, why do you think that there is maybe a disconnect between what people see as differences in the workplace and that there's a big gap there versus what you're actually finding in your research that we're actually more similar than we are different, right? Why are people seeing that there are these generational gaps in the workplace?
I think it's a great question, Ethan. I honestly think that there's probably three or four things here, and I'm certain it's very nuanced given the situation, right?
Sure.
One is that our leaders. In fact, we know from demographic data that we have on the current leadership in business, they're mostly Gen X, and they're mostly and still boomers, right? And millennials are just starting to join the ranks of our company leadership in most companies. Um, those folks may be a little insulated because of some of these generational differences, but also because of just their role, right? Some of the things I'm talking about the pressure on cost, things like that, these things may be a little less clear to them, and given where they are in their life and their career and their achievement. So that may be one part, is just
Mm.
we need to do a little bit more, have a little more curiosity, a little more understanding about why these things feel like such big issues across generations, even if our roles are not putting us in a situation where those are our everyday realities. I think that's one thing. I think a second thing that is that I think, one of the other interesting findings in our data is that across all of these roles, business leaders, HR leaders, people managers, and knowledge workers, um, 50% or more are not working in the workplace 5 days a week. What that means is a lot of these kinds of issues and considerations are also, I think, sometimes conflated with what it means to not be working in physical proximity to our colleagues every day of the week.
Mm.
Now, I happen to have a belief that if work can be done from anywhere, it should be done from anywhere, and that we need to change our perspective from how do we get people back into the workplace to how do we create really meaningful, lore creating, trust creating, culture creating moments of physical proximity that can then power and empower our at a distance collaboration on the daily, weekly basis, because that's going to be the reality of the workplace moving forward. But I think we're still figuring that out as businesses and as leaders and as organizations, exactly how to actualize what I just articulated. So I think part of this kind of generations at work thing is also kind of a we're not at work physically together thing, and there might be some of these things are getting conflated, right? That,
Mm.
or at least getting accentuated because of the hybrid work environment. The last thing I would say is that I think that you know we. We do have some places where we see some pretty significant differences between the generations. I kind of highlighted the things that are common, but one of the places that we saw a very interesting, significant difference is in the way that generations are thinking about the role of values in their work environment
Mm.
and what they're looking for relative to values alignment in the workplace. And the reality is that for boomers and Gen X, they see and this is different than 21, in all honesty. They see the prevalence of values and how important my values are reflected in the workplace is less of a factor. They're willing to say, you know what, I would like to work for a company that reflects my values, but I'm okay if it's not the case, right? And that's a little bit different than it was 3 years ago. 3 years ago, pretty much everybody was saying, I want to work for a company that reflects my personal values.
Mm.
Um, Millennials, Gen Z, much more likely to say, I want to work for a company that reflects my personal values. And by the way, I also will leave a company much more frequently if it doesn't reflect my values. So the part that I'm mentioning here is really important because these issues around personal well-being, around flexibility is another factor, around, do I have access to learning? Do I have access to growth? All of those things are not just like factors for younger generations, they're values. So
Mm.
it's not, these are not optional. They're coming from a different place in their psychology, right? Their values. So I think sometimes that disconnect is a little bit less on like the focus on, are we going to have these things? Of course, we want a place where people are psychologically safe and inclusive and where well-being is valued and all that kind of thing. Of course, we want that. But when the generations talk about those things, they come at them from different places. And those younger generations tend to talk about those things as values that are really tied to identity, tied to really what and who they value most. So I think they show up a little differently. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, I think it does, right? And one thing, and maybe this is not totally related to what you're saying, but one thing I saw in the report was that um, the businesses should be a force for good was a similarity across all generations, correct?
Yes,
And
yes.
so I'm wondering if does it seem that all generations are seeing that as a value, or maybe the younger generations are like, no, that's a value, and other generations are saying that's I don't really subscribe that as a value, but it's still important to me, right?
I think, yeah, I think maybe it's the way I would say it. And again, these are probably more nuances than big differences. Ethan, is I think everybody, at least we see that really strong finding higher than it was in 21. Again, very surprising to me, given all of the last 3 years around some of these things that are values based, types of things. We're seeing even more strength in that finding where
Hmm.
across all those demographic groups you're saying people want their businesses to be a force for good. It's what values get expressed as a force for good is where I
Right.
think that there's some contours of differences, if you were not broadly horribly divergent, but things like climate change, okay, most of us can agree on that. Things
Hmm.
like pay fairness, most of us can agree on that. Things like, diversity and inclusion, there might be some differences in that, although very interestingly, again, given what we've seen in the world the last few years, we were very surprised to find that actually business leaders are more favorably, um, you know, uh, rating diversity, equity, inclusion as something that's important for their companies and important to them personally. Um, than they were 3 years ago. A
Hmm.
17% growth in how much
Wow.
DEI is important to business leaders personally, in
Hmm.
terms of their value system. So again, I think the point, I think it's the nuances here are really interesting. And, I mean, knowledge workers still care about DEI. An average of 70% of knowledge workers still see DEI as personally important for their company, but less. They've gone down, 70% from 3 years ago. So it's or down 12%. I'm sorry, not 70% from 3 years ago. So it's a nuanced picture. It's a very nuanced picture, and of course, I do think, as I mentioned a moment ago, the role you have in the company and how that aligns to your generation might actually have something to do with how we think about and express these various values and what it means for those values to be manifest in our workplace.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's making sense because this was one of the reflections I had when looking through the report. Once again, businesses should be a force for good. So it sounds like maybe what you're saying is that how we define, force for good is where there's differences, across generations. Because I saw that on one of the items here, right, taking a public stance on societal issues facing us today, right? There was a fairly large gap here between generations, right? It ranged everywhere from 70% of people saying that's important or to 32% saying that's
That's right.
important.
That's exactly right. Yep, that's exactly right.
And so I think this is helping me kind of maybe square that a bit because I saw the disconnect in my mind anyways between businesses should be a force for good, there being alignment, and this question there not being alignment. So how do you have a better understanding of how maybe the Gen X or Boomer generations see like where they believe the organization should be taking a public stance on societal issues facing us today? Did you get into those details?
We really, the kinds of things that people tend to put in the comments, and we can again code this by the demographic categories. Where we saw a lot of commonality was around things like climate change, environmental sustainability, those types of things, being a good corporate citizen, type of thing in your community, giving back to the community, those types of things. Employee well-being and support, of course, comes up there. Um, Being charitable, making sure that you're giving back to your community and having ethical practices. Those are the things that are broadly, kind of aligned across. I think, another place where we see some interesting convergence is that people want the workplace to have conversations around things that are important to us societally. But it's there is some, the younger you are, the more likely you are to think that that's a good idea. Do you know what I mean? Like everybody thinks it's a good idea to a certain extent, but the younger you are, the more you think it's a good idea for the workplace to be a place for us to have authentic dialogue about these issues. So I think it just, it in some ways, I don't know, Ethan, I wouldn't even guess your age, so I'm not asking you that, but I think that I know my own kids are millennials, and
Hmm.
what I see with them is, they have these conversations around societal issues, around, identity, around their mental health, around their physical health, around all the, it's all in one big container. It's not like there's a work conversation and a personal conversation in a way. Do you know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's all in one big, and I think the fact that we're working from home a lot of the time, it makes it easy for these things to feel very fluid and very, in some cases, blurry. I think the folks that grew up in an environment where there was a private self and a public self, um, I'm a boomer. I was just on the conversation with somebody a few minutes ago before this call, where they were talking about how, in my generation, you never would tell someone how much you were paid. You just never would do that. And
Mm.
in with younger people, there's websites and TikToks and all kinds of places where you could put that information out there, and people do so with impunity, right? So, and 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 I don't think that's bad. I mean, I think that's actually part of getting to a equitable pay environment for all. So anyway, I think there are some, generational differences that honestly can feel big, but once we actually talk about them, probably are not as big as they may seem.
Right, right. And so again, sticking with the research that you've done on generations and the similarities and some differences, what what actionable insights can managers or leaders of organizations kind of take away from this? So okay, we're generations are more similar than they are different, but they do have some differences, especially on things like values. What if you were to advise a manager or a leader on what to do with this information, where would you have them start?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think it kind of comes down to three or four key elements that for me are really important, Ethan. And I think the first one is to approach the work of leading and managing people with a growth mindset and genuine curiosity and empathy and compassion, right?
Mm.
I think one of the things that we all need to guard against is going to stereotypes and painting with broad brushstrokes. And so, the very first thing in terms of putting any of these insights to work is to learn from them, but don't use them to stereotype or to paint with broad brushstrokes. I think most of us really appreciate it when our manager or leaders show genuine curiosity about who we are and what really motivates us. And that's really an important piece, I think, of the takeaways from this. I think a second takeaway is that regardless of these generational differences, the things we hold in common are really powerful in terms of what it takes to build high performing teams, high performing cultures. Effective communication, effective access to learning and development, effective leadership and people managers, right? So rather than kind of trying to navigate around the kind of margins where there's differences, really put a lot of effort on the things where we have a lot in common in terms of our aspirations and deliver to those aspirations. I mean, we didn't talk about this specifically, but we asked people, what creates a great culture, and people are radically aligned across
Mm.
generations, across roles, all of this kind of thing. But where we're different in is in how well we think we're doing. Not surprisingly, business leaders think we're and HR leaders think we're doing better on creating high performing cultures than people managers and knowledge workers do. So
Mm.
again, you're going to, that sort of rising tide lifts all boats. You know what?
Mm.
A better performing culture is going to actually make sure that everybody can perform to their best, across and within generational differences and where we're in common. So that's a second thing. I think a third thing that I would say is, there's been a lot of research in the last few years around the power of growth mindset to
Mhm.
create the environments that really create human thriving. I think that, in this volatile VUCA world that
Mhm.
we all talk about, you know, a growth mindset is absolutely essential for people to be able to manage in this anxiety age. And creating an environment where growth mindset can flourish is a team sport. Bringing people through that process together, at Microsoft they call it the learn it all culture versus the know it all culture, and that's really what we're trying to build in our organizations. And again, that growth mindset will help us be not only as leaders curious about our people, but help create that kind of context for curiosity and collaboration that really creates high performing teams. And then the last thing that I would say that is really important about this data is that you know people leadership and management is not something that should be left to sort of folks that are just figuring this out. We actually know what it takes to unleash human performance in organizations, and being able to really develop our people leaders and managers to be the unleashers of human potential. We in the report call it elevate the elevators, the people who can truly elevate the performance of others. Those are the
Mm.
key to our future. And being able to really invest in creating the kind of people leaders at every level of the organization that can bring diverse teams together, including age diverse teams, generationally diverse teams together, and deliver exceptional outcomes is really, I think, one of the highest callings of an organization and its leaders, and is also one of the things that, if we did it better, we would actually be elevating our people and our outcomes. So those are the things that I would point to.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And now you've mentioned this a couple times now of just that there tends to be alignment across demographics in terms of what creates a great culture. Now, I'm sure the conversation around what creates a great culture probably requires more time than we than we have time today. But if you were to maybe highlight a few of those elements of what creates a great culture that people seem to agree on, because I think that would be really beneficial for our audience to understand. Hey, these are what people are saying, right? And there's alignment around these elements.
Yes, communication, effective communication is right at the top of the list,
Mhm.
always.
Yep.
Clear goals and accountabilities, always right at the top of the list. Trust and psychological safety, that was high a couple of years, 3 years ago. It's even higher now. That language would not have probably been on our radar. 6 years ago, 10 years ago, that's a new element. Collaboration. Having leaders who are good role models, learning and growth, this growth mindset. These are the things that come up as
Mm.
things where we're all aligned. So, and the thing that I think is really interesting about that, Ethan, is of course, these are not so-called rocket science in the same that like, there's
Mhm.
not like a magic bullet. There's not like one thing that trumps all the rest. It's how all of these things work in a system to unleash the potential of people together, individuals and as teams, to actually achieve reliably exceptional outcomes, right? We know this about human performance. So there's nothing here that I think is actually that surprising. In fact, what we found in the data from 21 to 24 is that the list of these is very consistent. We've seen some movement within the list. I mean, leadership has gotten even stronger. An environment that fosters learning and growth has gotten even stronger. But all of these things are very, very consistent from over the last 3 years. If anything, all of them have increased in emphasis from 21. But here's the thing, when you look at something like a net promoter score, which we didn't specifically ask net promoter type questions, but we're really looking at like who strongly agrees that we're really doing this stuff well.
Mhm.
Actually, the gap is bigger from 21 till now among
Interesting.
knowledge workers and people managers, because, well, people managers we didn't pull out as a specific demographic, but the gap is similar, so we can kind of hypothesize on that. And I think so. Again, it's not necessarily that we're not doing worse. I don't know that we're doing worse than we were in 21, but we're also not doing better. And that is the part that we bring to our clients and I take seriously as a business manager is how can I, and business leader, business owner, how can I do better on these things? Because they're not, again, rocket science. Effective communication, the leader should be separating the signal from the noise. How can we equip our leaders, support them so that they can truly be those people in the organization that helps people understand the context of our work, what we're trying to achieve, and how to get there together. Clear goals and accountabilities. Again, I mean, I'm guessing both you and I learned this in our first few months on the job. If you don't have goals
Mhm.
and accountabilities, how do you know how to spend your time, right? So again, these are not rocket science, but we can do better. And I think part of this is honestly making it a little simpler, getting getting pretty rigorous and focused on the things that we really know are going to be the most important things, not all the things, but the most important things to unleashing human performance and building that high performing, sustainably high performing culture.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, this is really interesting to me, and this is something I've, as you can imagine, I think a lot about, and you think a lot about, just given our the things that we do out in the world. But you know, cultures, people, how people are, viewing their cultures. Like you said, it hasn't necessarily gotten better. I know with Gallup's research around employee engagement, that has actually decreased a little bit. And I'm curious, what are you coming to understand around why there tends to be this disconnect between um the things people know that create a healthy, effective culture, and the culture's not necessarily getting better, right? Like where is the gap? Because like you said, it's not rocket science, and I think at this point, many leaders understand that, of course, things like effective communication, trust, and psychological safety, roles and responsibilities and accountability are really critical and important. Yet we're not seeing the numbers move in terms of engagement and things of that nature. And so, where's the roadblock right now, based on what you're seeing out in the world?
I narrow it down to two things. This may be overly simplistic, but I think it's a helpful frame. One is that I think that we already spoke about this, Ethan. I think that businesses underinvest in building leaders and managers that know how to actually unleash human performance. I think we know what it takes, but I think we ask so many things of leaders and managers that don't have to do with how they're actually unleashing human performance in their organization. And at the end of the day, I mean, there probably are some exceptions, but for the vast majority of organizations on the planet right now,
Mm.
um, helping the individuals that work in that organization be good at their jobs is job number one, because that is
Mm.
how we achieve our goals collectively. And I think we just
Totally.
ask so much of leaders and managers that don't have much to do with that, including, candidly, sidebar, HR, putting a lot of things on people, leaders, and managers that may not really support truly unleashing the performance of people. So I put that really at the top of the list. But the second thing that I would say that I think is really a key part of this is um, I don't think that when we talk about culture and talk about achieving great cultures, that we often talk about it in a way that is uh, uh, the way we're talking about it right now. Some of the ways in which I've seen culture get talked about in organizations is not really it's the overlay of what's happening to the people. It's not about actually the people thriving. It has to do with, do you have a culture that's more of a servant culture? Do you have, it's like
Mm.
that kind of personality almost stuff when it's like, honestly, unleashing human performance is pretty fundamental. And you can have different styles. You can, it's so I think it's really also getting pretty simple and clear on what it takes to build effective cultures. And I kind of boil it down to two things. It takes deep trust and it takes high expectations.
Mm.
That's the thing that every high performing culture I've ever seen, that's in the research, the ones we've helped build, has sufficient deep trust, i.e., psychological safety, inclusion, a sense of like humans are safe to be themselves in this place, to learn, to grow, to fail, to achieve together, deep trust, high expectations. there's an environment where what's expected of me is clear. It, I have consequence to my actions, because if I don't do my job, something is not going to be done that needs to be done. It matters if I show up. And expectations that create the environment where we have to learn together, where we grow together, where we achieve together, that growth mindset.
Mhm.
Those two pieces, it can look different in a tech company that's early stage to a big stable financial services company. But if you don't have those two pieces together, regardless of how the business context shapes the personality or the cadence or the formality, informality, like all of that, but if you don't have those two pieces, you're not going to have a high performing culture. And so for me, that's really the other piece, is we just got to kind of get this a little simpler and know what it is that we're really aiming for in order to create cultures that are truly effective for people and for business.
Yeah. Well, this certainly speaks to, of course, some of the priorities of organizational leaders, some big things that they should be focusing on here. Is there anything else you would add? Like if you're looking at your data and what you've come to understand and the priorities of organizational leaders throughout, would it be starting there, and would you also add anything to their priority list at this point?
No, I think we've really touched on it, Ethan. I mean, again, probably be wrong of me to say we need to simplify and then add a long list of things, right? So I would say, keep it simple. Your organization, I used to have many years ago, I used to have this slide in one of my, speeches or presentations I used to do, is was like, kind of the, remember when the Intel brand
Mm,
advertising is out, is like, Intel inside. I used to have a little picture of something like that. There are people inside your business. At the end of the day, I think we've actually come a long way in the probably 20 some years since I used that phrase. But the
mm,
truth is like, the future is human. Even with all of the AI, even with all of everything we're doing, that has to do with technology. When you talk to the people creating these technologies, one is, they're pretty clear that the idea here is to create technologies that make life better for humans. At least the good guys feel that way.
mm,
Hopefully, there's going to be a lot more good guys than bad guys in that world. But beyond that, there's going to be tremendous need for humans to figure out how to use these technologies, to use them ethically, to use them as a force for good, right? So the future is human. So getting really, really, really good at unleashing the capacities of humans to be learning together, achieving together, having breakthroughs together. There's really no higher purpose, I find, in
mm.
my work, but I think that's pretty true for most businesses too. And so focusing there is really, I think, where it's at and where the future's at too.
Yeah, beautiful. I love it. I concur 100%. Cheryl, this has been a really insightful conversation. I'm glad we could have this. Where could people go learn more about you or your work, or even be able to read this report?
Sure. Feel free to link in with me, Cheryl Fields Tyler, on LinkedIn. My company is Blue Beyond Consulting, just like it sounds. You can go to our website. You can download the full report there. Winning on the people side of business. Thanks so much, Ethan. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. All right, everybody. We will link to all of those items in the show notes. And besides that, we will see you next time. Hey, folks, wait. Don't go yet. Please stay with me for 1 second here. I want to let you know about a couple cool little goodies that we have available for you. If you dig this podcast, you will probably also dig our Managing with Mind and Heart newsletter. This is a monthly newsletter where we share articles that we write about, hey, how to thrive as a manager, how to lead teams that are characterized by high morale, engagement, psychological safety, care and respect, collaboration, and high performance. You can sign up for this newsletter by texting the word leading to the number 66866. Additionally, you can go to our website and sign up for the newsletter there. Our website is www.nashconsulting.com. And of course, if you're not already aware, we have our cornerstone program for leaders and managers, and it is called Managing with Mind and Heart. Go figure. This program is something that we often bring into organizations to work with all their leaders on helping them get aligned and singing off the same sheet of music with best practice management skills and behaviors. We've brought this to hundreds of organizations at this point with really good results. And if you are not able or inclined to bring our program in-house, twice a year, in the spring and in the fall, we offer this 6-day Managing with Mind and Heart leadership development program online for anybody that would like to sign up and join us. To learn more about this online course and to register, you can go to our website. Once again, that's nashconsulting.com. Or send us an email at contact@nashconsulting.com. All right, that's all. That's it. See you later. Bye.